let's get started. So I'm Tom Coughlin. I'm filling in for Dejan Milosevic, who couldn't make the meeting. And this meeting is being recorded, and we're asking everybody to stay on mute. We'll take questions through the chat chat here, and I'll be able to read those to Stefano, and he can answer them. So please put your questions in the chat function.
A teraz pytanie, czy pan
Why don't you mute everybody again? Okay, so Stefano Galli is an electrical engineer FSIA in Redwood City, California. He is a fellow of the IEEE, was made so in 2012 for his contributions to the theory, practice, and standardization of power line communication networks. And again, we've got over 400 people that registered for this event, so everyone needs to stay on mute. We will take questions through the chat function. This will be recorded. So Stefano, go ahead and talk about nomination and elevation of IEEE Fellows from Industry.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everybody. 10 years ago, I gave a talk at the Santa Clara Valley section on smart grid and communications, so I'm happy to be hosted again by the section. I'm going to mute everybody now, and we'll hold questions at the end, as Tom said, and please send them to the chat.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay.
It's David Gonzalez on the line.
Thank you. Okay, so this talk will be about three things. The fellow nomination elevation process as a whole, to give you an idea of, to some extent, the complexity and the many moving parts that are involved with it. And then the question that many ask is, how do industry nominees do in elevation? And we'll see that actually they'll do very well. And then the more practical part of it, most of the talk will be on how to write an effective nomination. There is around 1,000 nominees per year. So writing an effective nomination is really important because nominees face today more competition than ever before. It's been a monotonically increasing trend for nominations. Of course, I express here my opinions. They're well-educated opinions, but they're still just opinions. Let's start with the fellow nomination process. You need a nominator, who can be anybody, also a non-IEEE member. You have to have, of course, a nominee that has to have had 5 years of membership, continuous or not, and be of a senior grade, senior member or life senior member grade, in good standing. I was saying the nomination form, which will be new for 2021, is different from the previous ones in the sense that it is better organized in terms of how to input information, but has and shares many similarities with the past. You have to describe the best one or two individual technical or educational contribution and their impact, provide of course, verifiable evidence. Then you can input awards, professional activities, a citation. You need to secure 3 minimum references, which is mandatory. Okay, the nomination would not go through if you didn't have at least 3 references providing a letter. And there are also optional endorsements. Now, references are chosen by the nominator to advocate, and they have to be well-versed in the specific field of the nominee's contributions and provides an independent assessment. Independent, why? Because references are not shared with the society, so that the fellow committee can have 2 independent assessments from society and from endorsements are optional, but it is the most undervalued tool in all the history of nomination from industry member, because it's extremely important for the industry member. It's often misused, and we'll discuss that. Then we have two committees, 2 degrees, 2 steps of evaluation. One from the Society Fellow Rating Committee that has to provide to the Fellow Committee just, let's say, a ranking and a score from a technical point of view. Okay, no service and things like that. And then finally, the IEEE Fellow Committee that looks across all the society's rankings, merging into a single ranking, and then makes recommendations to the Board of Directors. How many get elevated at the end? Not more than the 0.1% of the voting membership of the IEEE. That's per IEEE bylaws, and this corresponds in practice to around 300 elevations per year, which are a little bit less than the 0.1%, but this is what's happening right now. There are 4 nomination categories, okay? And averaging over the past 10 years, you get this percentage of participation and composition from industry, academia, and government that are the segments that are tracked in the fellow nominations. Application engineers, for example, you see majority, 3/4 of them are from industry, but there is also academia and government that's in a quarter. Educator is predominantly academics. Research engineer scientists are mostly academia, 80%, but there is some industry and government participation. Technical leader is less dominant industry, 50%, and there is a substantial 1/3 of academics and 1/4 approximately of government. On the right, you see a double segmentation. That these are all fractions, so they all sum up to 100%. And you see the 2 dominant groups are academics, nominated as scientists, and industry members nominated as scientists. And then we have some percentage from practitioners in the industry, research scientists as government, and technical leader like academic and industry. What are the common evaluation principles between the Society Fellow Committee and the IEEE Fellow Committee? We'll go over them more in detail later, but just to give you an idea, you must have had the nominee individual technical or educational contributions. The contributions by practitioners have to be accorded equal recognition with theoretical development. So application and theory are on the same, must be considered at the same level. There has to be impact of the contribution, and it has to be already evident. So speculating on some whiz nominee, young, that can reasonably be impacting later is maybe not the right time to be nominated. The has to be already evident, the impact. Then there has to be verifiable evidence for both the contribution and the impact that stems from those contributions. Now, what evidence should you use? Well, it depends on the nomination category, not of whether you're industry or academia. It depends whether you are nominated as a practitioner or so on, and we'll go into that later. This is just to give you an idea of how many moving parts. So before March 1st, March 1st is the deadline where references, endorsers, and nominations have to be submitted. Then this information, except the references, are sent to the society. The society sent to the IEEE Fellow Committee ranks each society, so we have around, and councils, so we have around 50 separate rankings, narrative on the technical evaluation, and scores. The Fellow Committee gets the top and bottom nominees, 10% top, 25% bottom of the medium to large societies, and does an expedited evaluation. This stems from the fact by statistical analysis I did some years ago. Society and IEEE committees agree on the top and the bottom, which is pretty reasonable. Now, who's very good or very bad is easy to agree. But in the middle rank, there's more evaluation to do, and so they are ranked and according to these weighed criteria. At the end, there's in early October, there's a final selection at the face-to-face meeting after having a preliminary single rank. And then we send, the Fellow Committee sends to the Board of Directors for approval the recommended nominees. Now, the Society and the IEEE Fellow Committee is a very important role. The Society has a critical role, but there are distinct roles. The Society, first of all, sees only the nominees referred to that society, because every nomination has to be referred to a society. We'll look at this better later. Now, they have to provide a critical evaluation that is only a technical assessment, and they have to judge innovation, creativity, individual role, impact, and so on. The Fellow Committee, which is composed by 52 people, a chair, a vice chair, and 50 judges or evaluators at the IEEE level, have to evaluate the nominees. They have access to everything, so the society forums and to the reference forums. They, again, have to also critically assess how convincing and well-made the case of the nominator, of the Fellow Committee is. And we remember every year to the Fellow Committee members that they do not represent their own society, but the IEEE, because the Fellow Committee reports directly to the board. So we need to do the best interest of the IEEE. We have to critically compare at the IEEE level the importance of the contribution and its impact. And this goes across all societies because we have a bird's eye view of everything. And then finally, we recommend. However, this is important, both committees must follow the same evaluation principles as specified in the manual. Now,
so, Stefano, we have one question maybe. It's actually back 2 slides ago. What's the difference between a TL and an RE/S? That one there, yeah.
Research engineer scientist,
yes.
technical
Versus a
leader,
technical leader,
educator, and application engineer practitioner. These are the 4 nomination categories that have to be selected when you present a nomination. We'll give more detail about this later, but let's keep all questions for the end because it's already a very dense talk, and we'll go over certain things again on these things. This is a high-level view.
Okay, thank you.
So, elevation of academic and industry members. So we see here how many have been nominated in total. We're almost to 1,000 in the last 5 years. The total elevations, and then the ones from academia and industry. I didn't list government and other, which is another category that we track that are very small. But so you can see that fundamentally academics get elevated. The fraction of elevated academics is much higher, 4 times higher than the one of industry. So there's a question naturally arises. Why are most academics elevated? And this often brings additional questions. Are the accomplishments by industry members not enough for elevation? Are fellow criteria unfair and skewed to academics? Are industry or practitioner members disadvantaged compared to academics? And are industry practitioners giving up, trying to do too many unsuccessful attempts? And so basically this is why we don't see them. Well, often people give yes as an answer to this question, but in reality, and I will hope to make a solid case, that analysis suggests that the answer is actually always no. Let me show you the trend of nominations by employment type over time. You can see that academia has had a staggering growth in the last 10 years, whereas industry has been constant. Notwithstanding, industry members have left IEEE. I think I remember that the Industry Engagement Committee in the first year that measured the number of industry members detected through surveys a decline from 60 to 39% in 16 years until 2016. So notwithstanding that, nomination from industry has been steady, and also the other groups has been steady. If we go and look at the nominations by fellow category, okay, we see a similar thing. Scientist is the single most fast-growing category, nominations in that category, where the other ones have remained approximately constant. You can see also here, besides the weight of it, but also the number of nominees that are of average of the last 10 years present in the nomination. So while industry practitioners and technical leaders have been constant for 20 years, academics and members nominated as scientists constitute the largest and fastest growing fraction of IEEE. This growth overshadows everything else, and today has never been wider, this gap. So I would say that the frustration of what is observed at the output in having 4 times as many academics being elevated than industry is also caused by this very skewed input in the Fellow process. Many academics nominated, many academics elevated. Let's look what happens also across regions. You can see that most of academics are nominated in Region 8, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and especially in Region 10, Asia Pacific. In industry, we have Region 6, the Santa Clara Valley region, section region, is the one that retains the highest percentage of industry nominations, followed by Region 10 and Region 1, that is the northeastern U.S. So U.S. regions from 1 to 6 contribute 43% of all nominations, and 52 only in Europe and Asia Pacific. These are the elevations, okay? And you can see there is some proportionality from what we saw before. More academics than anything else are elevated in Europe, in Region 8, or in Middle East and Africa, and more academics are elevated in Region 10. And Region 6 performing exceptionally well in elevating industry people. We have also Region 3 that seems to be very successful also in elevating academics. Let's look now all nominees together, not separated by region. So we have, I'm sorry, not separating by employment type. So we have nomination and elevations in the 2 bars, and you'll see pretty much that the proportionality holds. Input X, output a function very close to X. There are, however, some gainers and some losers. Asia Pacific has a share of elevated nominees that is smaller than the share and the fraction of nominations, whereas Region 6 in particular has a higher share of elevations, and also Region 1 and Region 3 to some extent. This was Fellow Class 2020, one single year, okay? The things I've showed you. So let's see what happens when we average over 10 years. Still, proportionality when it comes to employment type holds pretty well. You see, fraction in, 71% for academics, fraction out, 70% of elevations. However, when we want to look at nomination and elevation per category, per fellow category, we see there is some imbalance. So I would say proportionality still holds pretty well, but when we go from 4 and 2%, it's only a 2% drop, but it's a 50% relative drop. And for the practitioners, again, it's only a 2% difference, but it's a 30% relative drop with respect to the nominations. Is this true also in terms of, these are fractions. Is it true also in terms of elevation probability? So let's look at the overall elevation probability average over the last 10 years. The overall IEEE one is 35%. And I show also the confidence interval at a 95% confidence interval. You can see that industry, the probability of elevation, albeit a larger confidence interval because there's fewer samples of industry members, is pretty much in line with the academic one. It's higher, but in the same order. When we look at the practitioners, educators, we see they substantially underperform with respect to research scientists and technical leader. So then a question is obvious to ask, while industry, why this happens? And we'll try to give some answers. But this facility, let's say, this trend that scientists and research scientists and industry members perform better across all segments you can see here. This is a normalized nomination table. The sum is 100%. This is the shares of the nominations. This is elevation probabilities, okay? And you say the probability of elevation of industry member nominated by practitioners is higher than that of academics nominated as practitioner, and so on. So across all the board, industry do better, even as scientists, as leaders, finally also as educators. But this may be a very high confidence interval because you have very small percentage of nominees. If you look on the other slice, let's see how the scientists do. Well, they do better definitely than practitioners, and they do definitely better than technical leaders, but maybe only for the academic part, because let's say that for government and industry, actually, they're comparable. So industrial nominees, I think, should look at the fellow process with renewed optimism, because what appears to be a preference in the elevation of academics is just a mathematical consequence of the input that is skewed towards having many more, an order of magnitude more academic nominations. So still, industry nominations are small. It's 200, so it's 25% industry, around 20% the weight. And we hope that actually seminars like this will help grow industry nominations. This is one of the goals of the talk. Instill some optimism and also explain the process. But maybe it's also understandable. Academics have a large network for nominators and references and elevations. Definitely enhances their career. University prestige, which transfers maybe more funding from government. But industry members don't have the same capillary network. And I would say, as an industry member myself, the fellow elevation does not comparably enhance an engineer career as much as an academic. Now, we saw that choosing the right fellow category is key. Why? Because the probability of elevation are different. So definitely, practitioners and educators really need to pay attention to how they write their nominations. But is this because of unfairness? Numbers don't answer that question, but it's difficult to say. Mathematically, I would say that in order to claim fairness, we would have to have the distribution of fellow worthiness across the a priori one across categories, but we don't have that, and it's very difficult to estimate. So the fact that the expectation that all probabilities have to be the same stems from this hard assumptions that all categories have the same fellow worthiness, which we cannot confirm. But there can be other explanations, perhaps that are more likely than biased, in my opinion. First of all, the talent pool of research scientists is much larger. Why? Because you have 800 nominees to choose from, not just 50 practitioners or 40 educators. So there's more quality nominations to choose from just because of sheer numbers. And those wind up filling up the available elevation spots, which are limited by the voting membership with the 0.1% probability factor. Now, growing competitive pressure in industry and the use of trade secrets, I think affects a lot the possibility of industry members to make their work known to the community at large. And that is a big problem, because if you can make your work known to the community at large, the verifiable evidence you can present is weaker or non-existent, especially, for example, extreme cases, those who work in defense, okay? That this is when they work on confidential things, they can't say they did it, they can't say what they did. So the scientist is probably the easiest case to make. Why? Well, because academics pursue wide dissemination in their work, so there's plenty of evidence, it's public. And also to some extent to evaluate, because the impact of scholarly work has been the object of quantitative assessment and scrutiny for decades. On the other hand, verifiable evidence of impact is objectively more difficult for practitioners and educators. Judging to products, implementations, change of industry practice, as well as their impact, is more difficult. It's not straightforward. There are fewer tools developed for this. And at the same time, for an educator, the development of innovative curricula or publication or education technology, also these, the impact is not straightforward. Another issue is there are a lot of badly written nominations, badly written references, badly written endorsements. That's really high percentage. So my guesstimate is that several nominators reference and endorse this, and perhaps even some evaluators, we can't exclude that, don't seem to have read the many available guides. But are there resources for nominators and references? Yes. I want to stress out that the fellow evaluation process has never been as transparent as today. All the fellow principles are clearly specified in the manual, a few also in the bylaws. And a tip to start this, just look at section 17 of the manual. Okay, it's 4 or 5 pages. All the evaluation principles are there. And it's important to get familiar with them. Then we have 3 guides for every participant, for the nominators, to write effective nominations, to write effective reference endorsement, and also for those who evaluate, the evaluators at the society level and the so-called judges at the triple level. Tip, again, although this 3rd guide is devoted to evaluators, I think it's useful also to nominators, because by reverse engineering, if you see how the evaluators think, you can better understand what and how to write. So read them all. Now there's other details of how the committee operates. Okay, how do we flag candidates? How we do evaluations? When do we do them? And in handbooks for the committee of the IEEE and also for the societies, these you don't really need to look at unless you are evaluating, but everything is spelled out. We also started to provide feedback to the society. Often, the society and the IEEE fellow committees agree, but sometimes they disagree. So when we disagree, we provide feedback. We started last year, around 50 cases were flagged of very high-ranked nominees that were not elevated, and we explained why, and to elicit also dialogue with the societies. 4 years ago, we also started to provide some feedback to nominators. It was the first time, never it was done before. The only thing that we were sort of allowed to do to some extent was to tell the nominator that the nominee ranked in the bottom third of all nominees. And so we suggested to wait for some time before renominating, and this time could be devoted to either rewrite the nomination in a better way or to wait that the impact could become more evident. But we didn't forbid people from renominating. So this appeal to self-restraint did not work. It worked for a couple of years, but then we went back to the same practice that people, basically, most people keep getting renominated every year. So this year, the new chair, Leda Lunardi, will provide also additional feedback to nominators. They have to share their ideas with legal yet. So all this documentation and these valuable resources are available for you here on this web link. It's much easier to remember IEEE.org/fellows, but this is the actual link that you get to. Okay. Now, what are the basics of fellow grade elevation? Fellow grade elevation recognizes extraordinarily individual technical or educational exemptions. Where does this come from? The Certificate of Incorporation of IEEE, the supreme governing documents, plus the second supreme governing document, the IEEE Constitution, Article 1, restates a fundamental fact that the purpose and the object of the corporations are to engage exclusively in scientific and educational activities, among other things. But scientific and educational activities are the pillar of our IEEE. Okay? Contribution by practitioners in the application of engineering, we went through that, is that they have to be accorded equal recognition. And this is a fundamental principle that is in the Fellow Manual. Verifiable evidence of individual contribution and the impact of the contribution has to be present, because elevation cannot be granted based only on the claims of nominator, reference, and endorsers. We understand in some cases it may be difficult to have verifiable evidence, but elevation just on the claims of the advocates may be a worse solution than the problem that we have. Impact of the nominee contribution also must be already happened, so well-educated guests and future impact are not. Let's look now at what is not a recognition for. And this stems from pointing out some things that often we see in nominations. Service to IEEE. So IEEE activities are considered in the evaluation by the IEEE Fellow Committee, not by the societies, but they weigh only 10% of all the other. The most important weights are impact on the society, a society evaluating committee, the society and council, and the individual contributions and the impact on the technology. But not because this does not recognize the important role of volunteers. Of course, there are many other recognitions, service awards. I don't know if medals for service, but definitely there's a lot of IEEE and society awards that recognize the important role of volunteers. Also, it is not a recognition for being a successful career, for having a successful career as a manager or an executive, even if it's in a technology company. Unless, of course, the nominee, point number one, has made extraordinary individual technical educational accomplishments. So basically, and this is often we see, just saying I'm the CTO of a successful technology company is not enough, unless the CTO has also contributed in the various stages of his or her career to technical accomplishments. So organizational position alone cannot be used as sole evidence of technical leadership. There's many other awards. This is a very important segment. Having industry leaders as part of the IEEE is an honor for the IEEE. But there are other recognitions for these members. Now, this is probably the single most important slide of all the talk. What is a technical, well, there's two, this one and the next one. What is a technical or educational contribution? Technical innovations, discoveries, inventions, advances in the state of the art. You have to demonstrate creativity. It has to be important. It has to mean to somebody. It has to have a degree of acceptance that is not only national but international. It has to impact industry, society. Technical leadership also is recognized. There's the technical leader category. But again, let me stress that the nominee's technical role must be crucial to the success. It's not just a project manager, the technical leader, or an organizational designation in a corporation. Again, the project, the technical innovation, the risk involved are important. When we look also at practice in the industry, design, evolution into manufacturing of products, their implementation, the advancement of industry practices and standards, that can be IEEE standards or not, of course, are other types of contributions. For education, impact on education in the fields of interest of the IEEE is developing a new curricula, courses that are innovative or unique or accredited officially for the first time based on the effort of the nominee. Authoring a widely successful and pioneering textbook, published books or papers on education and pedagogy, or also in the public press. We'll discuss this more, but often one mistake we find in nominations for educator is that as items of evidence, they put scholarly papers on technology. But that's not an impact on education. That is something that may be better addressed in a category as research scientist or technical leader or practitioner. So what is not a technical or educational contribution? And again, some typical mistakes found in nominations. Receiving a grant is a big deal, okay? It's actually, some people have a full-time job in finding grants. But a grant itself is a promise on something that has to be developed. So having won a grant, not necessarily is a contribution. The work still has to come. But also, I would say that grant can sometimes be used as evidence of income, of past contribution. If you keep getting grant on something, it's because your team, your company, your department has had impact on that something, and that can be used, but not as a contribution itself. The technical contribution is one thing, the recognition is another. A successful leader is managing a business line, even if it's a technology company. Again, I restate something that I mentioned before. Awards. Awards are not contributions, not necessarily evidence of impact. Depends on the awards. It has to be specific to what also the claimed contributions, the one or two best contributions are. Work during the PhD is certainly a technical contribution, but it may be way less than what you can do when you're more senior and independent, because the work of the PhD is done under supervision. Now, there is definitely an evolutionary component in doing research or in developing products, okay? It starts maybe during the PhD and then it matures later. So it's important in the nomination not to just cite the PhD, but also the maturity that has been added in the independent work. And of course, volunteering in IEEE by itself is not a technical contribution. This, I believe, is the second most important slide of today. How do I choose the contributions? How do I choose the nomination category? There was earlier a question on what are the categories. And how do I choose the Society Technical Committee that is the first step in the technical evaluation? So step number one. First, identify the most impactful contributions, and then that you believe are the most important, but then select the set of contributions that have the strongest verifiable evidence of individual contribution and impact. This is important. You may think that your work on A may be the most impactful, but if you don't have evidence, you have a weak case. So it is important to identify impactful contributions, but also select the ones that have the strongest verifiable evidence. Then how do I choose the fellow category? Depending on what is your strongest available evidence, you choose the fellow category. We'll see this in the next slide. But fundamentally, no specific evidence is required for any category. We don't say publications are necessary for scientists or for practitioners. Okay, we can say they're useful or they're not typical, but nothing is necessary. But it's important to understand that there is a relationship between the fellow category and the appropriate verifiable evidence. Then to select a society, you select a society whose field of interest best match the field of the chosen most impactful contributions. Now, the nominee and not even the nominator have to be members of that society. But if the nominee has done contributions in the field of interest of a society he or she is not a member of, it's perfectly legitimate to refer that nominee to that. You want experts to look at the technical work you've done. You don't want people that don't know about your technical work. Now, the nominee, in theory, does not have to be a known volunteer in that society. We stress this all the time. Half of IEEE members, I believe, are not society members. We have people that volunteer in regions, not in society. They shouldn't be treated any differently. So we say every day, and we state it in the governing documents, that the nominee does not have to be a known volunteer, and the society does not have to take into consideration volunteering to the society of IEEE. But I would lie if I said it doesn't help in practice. And although we're trying to change the mindset in societies and in some judges, in practice, it may help. I don't know how to change that except with education, but we'll talk about that also later. Now, when you write the contributions, this is the almost final step, you focus not on 10 contributions, but the 1 or 2 most impactful. For the last 15, if not 20 years, the nomination has always asked for 1 or 2 most impactful contributions, not the body of work. Because the body of work is difficult to compare. And industry may lose often with academics, because academics often have a wider publicly available body of work. So leveling the playing field by only choosing the top is more appropriate and more fair. But then you have to clearly articulate the individual contributions, the importance of the contribution, the impact, and argue the evidence. Finally, if you are in the industry and your verifiable evidence is limited, you should request the support of endorsers. It's optional, but you're strongly encouraged to do so. This is the most underestimated tool by industry members. Endorsements are often used as lightweight references. You get a famous person in the field to write an endorsement. The endorsement goes to the society, and you're sort of trying to affect the judgment of the society by having well-known people in the society provide the direction. But this is not why they were born for. Endorsement can still shed light on contributions that may be proprietary or not available for citation, and can be used to incorporate additional evidence on the nominee's technical contribution that the nominator may have not put on the nominations, but the endorser can introduce, if the endorser is qualified to do so. So this is why we say endorsement is more effective when provided by company officers, program directors, standardization officers, or colleagues in general that are in the position to attest and verify the claims of the nominator. So what is the best evidence for each category? Again, some things are expected, sometimes are very useful, sometimes they're useful but not typical, sometimes they're not expected but can still be useful. Nothing is required, nothing is thrown away, we look at everything. But you can see that for a practitioner or a technical leader, we don't expect publications. Actually, we specifically write in the guide for the evaluators, do not penalize practitioners or technicians if they don't have publications. They're not expected to have one. They still have to prove impact somehow. They'll have to do it with other evidence, but don't penalize them if they don't publish as much as an academic or publish at all. For scientists, we expect them. I mean, if you're a scientist, you have patents, you have publications. For educators, this is important. It's expected to have publications and very useful if and only if education-oriented. So if I write a great paper on, I don't know, image processing, and I submit that, I'm not sure I can find a connection to educators there. But if I write a book that is adopted, or if I write a paper on transactional education, or I develop for the first time, maybe before anybody else, curricula on including standardization, for example, into academic training, that is more valuable and more relevant, and so on. So this is very dense. I don't want to spend too much time. These slides are very dense. There's a lot of information, but it was done on purpose not to complicate the presentation, but to give you a resource to go back to after the talk. So you don't have to necessarily remember what I say. You go back and you look at it. So this is another example of very dense. What is that we tell evaluators about evidence and impact? I devote some time here in publications. There's a lot of misconceptions that, oh, you publish, you look at citation, that's it. Not at all. Okay? That's not what the practice is in the Fellow Committee, and I don't think in any department of academia. You have to look at the type of articles. Are there tutorial or surveys? Tutorials are very highly cited, but not necessarily it's a technical contribution or an innovation. It maybe shows maturity of the nominee in the field, but not necessarily that. What is the journal impact factor? Is a journal that has 90% acceptance rate or a journal that is more selective? And same thing for conferences. How many co-authors? Is the author the nominee first or second or always last? The number of citations, yes, but they're not the only thing to be looked at for impact of evidence of impact, because you can look at impact on technology or practice, inclusion in standards, inclusion, impact on products, impact on society at large. All these can be done also without a publication and are often more valuable than just citations. However, nominators often stop at citations, and this is a disservice to their nominees because other kinds of impact should be argued if they are there. Or maybe it's the sign that not often impact goes beyond citations, and that's another problem. But one thing I want to reinforce for practitioners and technical leaders, they are not required to have publication, as I just said. But often they use papers, scholarly papers published in Transactions on Conference, used as evidence. That can be evidence of having written something before anybody else. There's a date, a timestamp, it's scholarly, and that can be used as an item of contribution. But then, if it's lowly cited, you still need to argue for impact. And therefore, the nominator, if the citations on the papers are low, should argue in some other way what is the impact, okay? So it's not bad for practitioners and leaders to say, I've been the first one to say something, and it's on this conference paper 20 years ago. That's great. But we caution evaluators with the fact that practical papers often tend to be less cited than academic. So when we have papers written by industry people, we don't just compare citations with academics. That would not be fair. But still, we would require some impact. And if a paper has very little, I mean, there are cases that they have been used to argue impact with 10 citations, it's very difficult to accept the claim of impact in such extreme cases. Impact of products. It can be measured in many ways. What we do is look at popular usage, press releases, level of innovations versus state of the art, revenue stream generation, and the right endorser, a corporate officer, for example, could clarify these things, including shedding light on the individual role of a nominee. A product is usually developed by a team, so it's important also to argue what is the individual role of the nominee. So a company officer, a supervisor can definitely, a product owner can definitely shed light on this. Standardization. IEEE has a great tradition in standardization, okay? There are some societies, just to mention I think the biggest one, PES. 50% of standards come out of PES. So this is an important contribution from industry members, practitioners, and also some researchers. I've been half researcher and half standards all my life for 10 years, or 10, 15 years, most of my life. So you can have impact by submitting influential contributions, okay? They may not be always available to public consumption, but in some cases they are. For example, 802 makes all contributions available. Other standards do. Unfortunately, not everybody, and there has been some discussion on make contributions to the standardization citable and available to the public. But if you have contributed features that have been included in the standard, especially if mandatory, You have led technical discussion, drove the grouping group to consensus, and people can testify to this. This is certainly important. However, I caution, one thing that is often overlooked in this nomination is that the most difficult part in claiming impact on standardization is that the individual role of a nominee is unclear, because standardization activities are intrinsically team activities. It's the team of the company supporting the nominee, although if I am the one advocating in the standards group for something, I have had the support of other people in my office to write contributions, do simulations, even if they're often not necessarily listed in the contribution. And also the standardization working group itself. A good standard is not only the result of one person, it's a collage of contributions. Impact of patents. Also, this is not straightforward to assess for certain reasons, and also because many details are not given. The order of authors are often do not reflect the individual contribution. Often they're policies in companies about having alphabetical order. Some patents that are issued may not even be valid. You discover later they have been invalidated by courts during litigation. However, there are things that can be done and verified by the right endorsers. First of all, tell me, it's a design or utility patent. Okay? What patent claims are from the nominee, especially if they're multiple inventors? Has it been sold, licensed, and things like that? And there's a bunch of other questions. Peer recognition can take many forms. Not only awards from IEEE, but company recognition, being the fellow in IBM or HP, for example, or in Bell Labs. Induction in national academies, Inventors Hall of Fame, having been often asked to give a keynote to a very important conference. That could be scholarly conference or trade and exhibit conference and things like that. Endorsements, again, very useful when little verifiable evidence of impact exists. Now, how do I choose my references and my endorsers? References are highly valued when provided by experts in the specific field of the nominee contribution. Having a reference, even if famous in his or her own field, but does not know the nominee's work and is not able to give the personal touch in the reference to elaborate on those contributions, is not as valuable. And also, don't choose only references who have collaborated with the nominee. For endorsers, I strongly encourage not to misuse endorsements by using them as pseudo-reference, as I mentioned before, because those are often done because the endorsement are seen by the Society Fellow Committee. Endorsements have very specific role. Strengthening the nomination contribution, complementing with the limited verifiable evidence in a nomination, and provide additional information. Now, for both, do not choose too many references or endorsers from only one region of the world or the nominee's own company or institution. It happens more often than one would think. Now, you have selected your references, you have selected your endorsers. What should they write? Often references are badly written. Often references are about the great career of the of the nominee. And even if the nominee is nominated as a scientist, they cite how many PhD students the nominee as a professor has. These are irrelevant for the scientist category, or maybe relevant for an educator, but not for a technical leader, for example. Mentorship in the industry is important, but if you have been nominated as technical leader. Now, provide details in the bio section first that confirm you're an expert in a nominee's technical field. Awards specific for that field, if you have, or publications, or definitely a claim that you have extensive knowledge of that field. And then focus mostly on the specific contribution listed in the nomination, less on the career of the nominee. Describe the nominee's contribution in your own words. Some references copy and paste, unfortunately, from the nomination. References have to provide their own interpretation and their values. Of course, you can reinforce what has been stated, but avoid cutting and pasting. Endorsers, the first thing they have to say is, why are they providing that endorsers? Are they providing additional information on what? Are they reinforcing some claims? Are they introducing new evidence? And they have to clearly articulate what the nominee's individual contribution were, especially if it's a team group. Now, for both, provide specific examples of how that contribution have impacted the technical field. Did it change the practice? Did it change products? Did it become an adopted technology by default? Did it spur other fields and provide quantitative but also qualitative measures of the nominee's contribution? But avoid generic and grandiose statements. The nominee is a very prolific author. This is almost irrelevant to the things we look at. Or is a pioneer in his contribution without saying what is the pioneering aspect is a statement that stands on its own. Now, I understand it's not easy to tell somebody famous what to do, but to some extent, that's the job of the nominator. I understand you're asking somebody in the National Academy of Engineering, a pluri-awarded member of our technical community, to serve as reference. You are elated that that reference accepted, and then you tell that reference how to write. I know it's difficult, but do it because often it's not written well, the reference or the reference. So let me conclude my remarks by saying that industry nominees are a very important part of membership, and it is vital to recognize the serving industry members for their accomplishments. And I would say that data supports the notion that industry members have a very good shot at elevation. So I strongly encourage industry members to get nominated with confidence, and don't get discouraged at the first unsuccessful attempt. The average industry nominee that is elevated after 1.5 attempts, so between 1 and 2. 90% of those who are elevated within 3 attempts. So there's no shame, and there should be no discouragement if you have some successful attempt. When you have 1,000 nominees competing with you, you face an unprecedented competition. So it's key to write an effective nomination. So read the guides. The nominator has to read them. The nominee that is helping the nominator has to read it. The references, the endorsement, everybody, including, of course, the evaluators and the judges. The practitioner category, I think it's still not well understood, especially from nominators, probably also from those who evaluate. I can't exclude that. But from what I've seen in the nominations, it's especially misunderstood at the nominator level. So although it's a still small segment of the nominees, 70%, and there is approximately 45 new nominations in the practitioner level every year, compared to 1,000, it's a small number, it is important that these accomplishments of a member get recognition. So I can say, read again the guides. If you're nominating somebody in educator or practitioner, read it again, because this is a difficult category. Okay. Now, are only industry members the ones that I encourage to look at elevation with optimism? Fortunately, not. And this goes also to some of the fairness of the fellow committee way of looking at things. Look at women. Women also can look at elevation with optimism. After 40 years or more of frustration, in 2020, last year, the most women nominated ever, the most women elevated ever. So I would say then to what are often considered the underrepresented minorities in IEEE industry and women, the numbers on your side, don't be shy, be proactive, find a nominator, and be nominated with confidence and with diligence. Read the guides, read the guides, read the guides. This is my my last slides. I will make them available next week in PDF to the host and the organizers, and I'm happy to entertain any questions if you have. I think Tom has been collecting them for now.
That's Stefano, and thank you for speaking. I will go through some of the questions myself, and as you know, I have to drop off to get on another phone call in just a few minutes, so I will also email them to you right after that. But let's get started. What's the difference? Let's see. I think you already addressed this one. What's the difference between TL and RES, unless you'd like to add more to that?
Yes, that was the first question. So it's 2 of the 4 categories in which a nominee is nominated from. There's 4 to choose from. And the 4 have basically echo what was the career of the nominee in terms of the main contribution. It's a way to categorize nominations.
Okay. Should the 3 references be obtained from existing IEEE Fellows or any other persons at work or co-researchers? And I think they have to be fellows, correct?
They have to be IEEE fellows, but there is one exception.
Ah, okay.
Since Region 9, Latin America, has extremely low number of fellows, it is allowed for a senior member of Region 9 to provide a reference to a nominee from Region 9. That's an exception that is in the manual.
Very interesting.
In all other cases, you need to be an IEEE Fellow.
Okay, that's interesting and good to know for folks in Region 9. Here's a question, another question. Could it be that more academics are elevated because they can find IEEE Fellows to support their nominations?
Yes, this is the network, the argument on the network that I mentioned before. Academics have a wider network, so it's easier to find references. Now, until a few years ago, you had a minimum of 5 up to 8 references to be submitted. And that was recognized, that was a high bar for non-academics. So we reduced it, 3 to 5, which is a big reduction from the 5 to 8. So we were cognizant of that issue, and we acted on it.
Okay, here's another question. Let's see, sorry. How is it possible to have more elevations and nominations for a given region? I think this is when you're showing some of the statistics. Someone had that question.
How is it possible that you get more than the fair share? Well, because there's nothing that says that mathematically the fair share is equal elevation. In order to say what is fair, you have to say what is the fellow worthiness of all the population, and that's very difficult to say. I mean, are the academics more fellow worthy than industry? Or I challenge anybody to bring me statistics to prove that, or that practitioners, there's more or less quality than technical leaders. We don't know. So we often ascribe to equal probability outcomes or equal fractions the fact that the value of fairness, to some extent, when there is pure proportionality, then to make a mathematical comment, the conditioning marginal becomes irrelevant, and so there is independence. So it's independent if you are industry or academia and so on. But that necessarily doesn't mean fairness. If it's true that industry people are better than academics, then it's unfair that they have the same probability of living. So you see, it's a very difficult thing to say, fairness. And in some cases, we see, for example, here, Asia Pacific, there is a net loss in terms of proportion, where others gain. But this is where numbers surrender. It's difficult to find a root cause for this, only based on numbers.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to send you the rest of them because I have to get on my other call. What can IEEE industry members do to increase their fellow nominations?
So, increased fellow nominations is important, okay, although my fellow judges will complain that then they'll have more work, but it's important, and especially for those underrepresented categories, as I mentioned here. You can have search committees at the society level, for example. Maybe even the industry engagement committee can have its own search committee. Find deserving nominees, couple them with a good nominator, have them read the guides. Again, that's a repetitive mantra that I continue to say. And encourage people, and this was also true for women. Maybe there is some research in statistical science, in social science, as women tend to be less courageous than men in looking for a nominee. They wait to be nominated. They don't feel they are. I don't know if that's true or not, but then definitely go out and scout also women that are not maybe self-confident enough to go out themselves to find a nominator and couple them with a nominator and encourage them to do it. This is why I wanted to show that last slide, because just in case the social studies were correct, I want to give them a sense of optimism. Now, it is important, one thing, if search committees are done, and they're not forbidden. This is specified in our handbooks. Those who advocate have to be orthogonal to those to evaluate. So the Society Fellow Committee should not be also the advocate for the search committee. There should be 2 separate committees and have no common member, okay? Because those who advocate have to be separated from those who actually review. But besides this, I encourage to have more. I think Roger Fuji, the chair of the Industry Engagement Committee, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, if you're here, also mentioned IEEE should go out and talk to companies, you know, the Apples, the Googles, the big companies, and say, make a case that it's important to foster the professional development and the professional recognition to their own members, to their own employees. And certainly also that, I think, is a very important thing, because if I do it for personal passion, I get less motivated than if I see that my boss likes that I'm a fellow or my VP likes that I'm a fellow. So I think IEEE can do a lot for this. So Tom, unless you're muted, it means you left. Thank you very much for helping and introducing me. I got your email.
Can I ask a question, please?
I would like to go in the order that Tom sent first, and then I'll open the floor. What level of... Is the nominator's name status visible to both societies and central committee? Yes, they're both visible to the society and to the central committee. The process still seems very tilted, or maybe tilted, towards technical leaders. How does someone from EMS, a technology and engineering manager, who might have worked in advancing the state of practice, say in engineering process, demonstrate advanced achievements? I can understand this comment. It's not always, it is easy to make a case, but it's not only for impact. It's not only in the case of engineering management, but if the advancement is in the practice or in the engineering process, that not necessarily is a technical leader. That could be a practitioner. The problem is there evidence to support that? And the issue of evidence is also for other kinds of nominees, those in defense industry, for example, as I mentioned before, who work on confidential things, or in some companies that have more resource, that resort more on trade secrets. Because when you patent something, maybe you can publish on it in many cases, but with the trade secret, you don't patent and you don't publish, so you don't have. That's a problem. Some employment sectors are less generous in allowing,
Stefano,
quote unquote generous, in allowing their employees to produce verifiable evidence. What level of collaboration with a prospective nominator is not accepted? Paper co-authorship, semi-affiliation, contribution, research project, other. I imagine from the point of view of the nominee, can a co-author be your nominator? Yes, and that can be useful. For example, if that co-author can shed some light on the role of the co-author that is being nominated in the joint publications, for example, or that co-author could serve as a reference to verify that, or as an endorser. Same affiliation is also fine. Often in industry, the nominator, okay, is your supervisor, your VP, and that's perfectly fine. It is less used in academia, but I don't think there's an issue there. Often, professors nominate their former PhD students, or they serve as reference. That's perfectly fine. So there is, Leda Lunardi, the current chair of the Fellow Committee, has developed a long list of conflict of interests. And you can resort to her. They will be soon included in our handbooks and give more clear answers. Does ratings of reference matter? Yes, very much. Very, very much. And they are considered more if they're done by the people I mentioned, experts in the field, okay, that don't copy and paste the nomination, that are able to articulate, and definitely it matters. And I have to say, since the competition, we have 1,000 people, you better get all extremely qualified. If not, they're very difficult. But so this is an encouragement to references. If you don't believe the nominee is qualified, don't provide a reference, because that saying extremely qualified may not be appropriate, because you're basically saying something you don't think. But if you say something different, it can damage the nominee. So perhaps there may be a conflict there. Is there a minimum time needed to be a senior member status? No, you can be elevated today, and 5 minutes later you can be nominated as a fellow, as long as you have had, I think in a higher grade, 5 years of continuous or discontinuous membership. This exhausts the email that Tom sent. Now, I'll mute everybody, but you can unmute yourself, or actually, can you please raise your hand, and we have maybe still a few minutes to answer some questions, please.
Okay, I'll ask the question. You mentioned about the verifiable impact for people from the industry. Let's say, for example, as you know, people in the industry don't publish much because of proprietary intellectual properties. Their work is not easily verifiable. But for example, if someone was involved in designing or leading technical products with let's say sales numbers, type of products that these designs went into, or at times you allowed even to mention that. Can you please list forms of verifiable impact for people from the industry?
Yes, I mentioned some of them on the slide, so when you will go back, you will see them. If you don't have publications, definitely having participated to the implementation, the creation, the conception of a product that has a high degree of acceptance. So is it a product that is used everywhere? It doesn't have to be necessarily a product that gets revenues, because let's look at Google, no? The first time Google came out, it was free, and we don't pay for it. And yes, they make money with other things, but that's an example. So it can be not necessarily something that directly is sold, but it can be something that is widely used across the world. The higher the degree of acceptance is important. For those products that actually are sold, having revenues for the products are important. That can be an endorser to shed the individual contribution, because products are most of the time done by teams, and very difficult to find a single person doing everything. And so what is the key contribution of the nominee to that product? Just having been part of the team as even a good member of the team may not be enough, but having had a fundamental role. To some extent, there are, and for patents as well, are they licensed? Do they have value? There's a lot of patents that are not used by the industry. So not all patents mean something that is of impact. But those who are used by industry, those are the ones that you would like to find an endorser, that they're a company or your own company officer and things like that. So these are very important things. And since it's not easy, we gave great value to that. I remember in the fellow committee, judges are very, very happy when they see very good evidence on not traditional publications, for example. So definitely products, impact on standards, degree of acceptance, revenues, but individual role and impact, of course, I mean, these are all things you can argue with endorsers. Yes? Oh, I see a question about a link to the recorded lecture. So if you go, when you go to the first page, okay, no, it's not here. But actually, when you click on the nomination form, you have, or in the invitation, there is a link to where all the talks of this corporate liaison program are posted. And I imagine the slides will be posted there. But the actual host that Tom and Dan will email all attendees, actually all those who have registered, because 400 people registered, but I think 160 attended, these logistical questions. So where the talk is and where the slides are. A little difficult to me parse the questions on the chat, but
Stefano,
yes.
Stefano, this is Piero. I just copy all the questions on the chat, put it in a Word document, and email it to you. I could have it read
Thank
to
you.
or you can read them yourself.
Maybe what I can do is to also, since we're now 15 minutes over, I will be happy to answer these chats offline, and
Okay.
that document will also be present when you download the talk, or it will be an available document with my answers to your questions.
Okay.
Okay, I will put the question as anonymous, and so I will not report the name of the person who posed the question. Hopefully that is better. So I guess it's time to say goodbye. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. The fellow process is a very important one. It's thing that makes IEEE members proud. It's something that I hope I have given you some optimism to pursue. But also read the guides, read the guides, read the guides. Thank you very much. I'll close the session now. And you will soon hear from Dane and Tom on where to find answers, talks, and slides. Thank you.